Okay, so before we get started designing our own XML file format, let's take a look at some common XML design mistakes so we can make sure that we don't repeat them. Mistake number one is using the word XML as the document root. I've seen this from time to time, and in fact, it's not just using XML, it's using any word that begins with XML. Now, this is not specifically an error, but you shouldn't do this. And the reason is because the term XML, along with words that begin with the lowercase xml, is reserved for use by the W3C and the XML specification. And besides, root tags in documents should be descriptive, and they should reflect the type of document that they're representing. And if you name your root tag XML, you're not following that principle. Of course it's XML. What else would it be? In fact, if you were to add the XML declaration above this, you'd make it even more obvious. So don't name your root tags XML. Choose a descriptive name. Common mistake number two is including information in an XML file that is not itself XML. And you can see an example of that here. You can see this is a tag that describes a file, and the file info, the name is pretty clear, but then there's this thing called attributes. And if you've ever worked on a file system, you'd know that files have permissions on who can read, who can write, and who can execute them. The problem with this is that you're forcing the person consuming this XML file to do further processing that, number one, the XML parser can't do for them, and number two, is not in a very obvious format. If I didn't know that files had attributes like this, indicating who had read and write and execute permissions, and that these permissions were grouped into three categories for the world, group, and individual, then I would have no idea what this means. So don't include data in an XML file that has to be processed further beyond what the XML parser can already do. You've got this powerful XML parser, you should make it do all the hard work. Don't force people to consume your document format. This is an example of including a format inside the XML file that's either proprietary or specific to one system or another. You could easily rewrite this format using XML, and that's what should have been done here. The idea is to aim for clarity and ease of use in the XML rather than compacting the syntax down as much as possible in order to save room. Don't be afraid of being verbose in your XML files. XML files are supposed to be as self-documenting as they can possibly be, and I should be able to consume data in an XML file without having to worry about which system things came from or having to use processing techniques beyond what the parser gives me. Okay, mistake number three involves being too precise with your tag names. So let's take a look at this example. On the left-hand side, we have a snippet of XML code that encapsulates a furniture order, and you can imagine that this had come from some furniture store or a factory or something. We have the same thing on the right. Now on the left, you notice that each tag is named individually, and they're very specific. So this one here is a sleeper sofa, we have a queen bed, coffee table, and so on. Whereas on the right, we've got a much more loose coupling between tag names. So instead of calling this sleeper sofa, this over here is a sofa and then has an attribute of is sleeper. And here we have bed, and beds can have different sizes, so we have sizes equal to queen, and so on down the line. Now, on the left, the reason why this is a problem is because this causes an unnecessarily tight, what we call coupling with the underlying processing code. Imagine a situation where I had some XML processing code that counted up the number of tables in the furniture order. Well, on the left-hand side, if I add a new table type and I call it something else like, nightstand or end table or whatever, if I want to do that, I then have to go back and change the processing code because I have to account for the new table name because I've added a new tag. In the example on the right-hand side, that code could be left as is because all I would do is add a new table tag and I would simply describe it in the attribute that I have here for type. So whatever code I had that did things like counted up tables or retrieved all the table tags and added up their prices that were in a different attribute, all of that would remain the same. The other problem with the code on the left versus the code on the right is that it makes writing things like XPath expressions and XSLT templates a lot more complex because, again, I've gotten so specific with my tag names that every time I add a new one, or if I want to change the code around, or if I want to change the order in which tags appear in the XML, chances are I'm going to have to go back and change the corresponding XPath or XSLT templates. So this is a bit more of an art than it is a science, and there's never any real right or wrong answer, well, except maybe in this case. But the idea here is try to choose tag names that represent base level classes or objects, and save things for descriptions in attributes or child tags. So a good example here is the sleeper sofa. This is clearly an adjective describing a noun. So try to use nouns as your tag names and save the descriptive attributes for things like adjectives and so on. Okay, mistake number 4 involves being far too compact with your syntax. Take a look at the example here. Okay, now I've got some XML code, and it's really compact, but I have no idea what any of this means. Like, what is an F-O? Like, what is S? Is SL? Just by looking at this, I have no idea what any of this is. Well, I can make it a lot clearer. Suppose I did this. Now it's a lot clearer. See, now my tag names are a lot more descriptive, and we can see that this is an evolution of the furniture order that we had from the previous example. Once again, we've drastically improved the readability and usability of this XML file just by being a lot more descriptive with our tag names. So we can see now that this is a furniture order, and it's grouped by living room and bedroom, and there are tags that represent items that would go in each. And we've expanded out the tag names and attributes, and we've added some pricing information. This is much easier to understand. So the lesson here is don't worry too much about making your code compact. You need to aim for readability and maintainability. Verbosity is not necessarily a bad thing in XML. Okay, so now that we've seen how not to do things, let's take a look at some design tips for how to make good XML, and that's our next lesson.